Tom Ravert is a real estate strategist, investor, and educator with more than 40 years of experience guiding buyers, sellers, and homeowners through every market cycle. He will discuss his book, Rudiments of Real Estate, and offer precious advice on home ownership. Tom, be very welcome to our show.
Thanks, Lisa. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Tom, buying a home is one of the most emotional and financially challenging experiences of one's life. Known for breaking down complex real estate principles into clear practical steps, you agreed to share helpful advice from your book, The Rudiments of Real Estate. So let's start with this. What exactly readers can find in your book?
You'll find everything from preparing mentally, financially, physically for that matter, right to closing. And the series actually continues on through kind of the life of your investment, if you would. We go through every step of the closing process, the due diligence process, and then finally trying to create a little wealth through home ownership, as well as generational transfer. So when you're looking to exit the property, or you can also include this into your estate, and so we address that as well.
Excellent. And some people say they prefer to rent. They don't want to be committed to a big down payment. They prefer to have reserves. And as we age, that changes a bit. So, in your opinion, after all this 4 decades of experience, why is home ownership important?
Well, I think the most important thing about home ownership is that it creates a cohesive community environment. It gives you a place of safety. I find it to be my sanctuary. I can hide from the world when things are not so nice out there, and it's a place of your own. It's a place where you create memories. It's a place to raise your family, and it really is something that it's the biggest wealth builder for most working class citizens. I mean, it really is their biggest asset in most cases.
Yes. And of course, property value changes from place to place. But what would be nowadays like a minimum cost, even in percentage of a down payment, for instance, to be a homeowner?
Well, typically, depending upon what type of mortgage you get, I mean, it's normally roughly around 20%, but there are plenty of programs, particularly in the US, that help first-time home buyers, and you can get a home loan for as little as 3% down. So there are plenty of programs. I am a big advocate of working with real estate professional, mortgage bankers, mortgage brokers, people who are knowledgeable and in the nuances of real estate finance. It's very, very important. It's probably one of several drums I continue to beat throughout the book about working with professionals and not taking advice from people who have just maybe had bought a home once or twice in their lifetime and throw around advice as if it's set in stone when they really don't know. But you really need to work with a professional. So working with realtors, appraisers, real estate lawyers, qualified inspectors, these are all the key players that you have to vet and work with so that you make a sound decision when you buy.
Perfect. And I bet this avoids a lot of the mistakes you're going to soon talk about. And how can we choose the right professionals to work with if you don't know anybody?
You can't be afraid to ask questions of professionals. And if a professional puts up a roadblock or can't answer a question in detail, it's a red flag. And once you see one or two red flags, you know that this is not the right person to work with. And what I mean by that is if someone can't explain to you the process of transferring title to a property, that's a problematic. I mean, you need to know this is what you're buying. You should know the mechanics of it. Now, granted, you may hire an attorney, but not all states in the U.S. require attorneys to represent buyers or sellers. So you have to be very, very careful. And if someone can't explain the basics, the fundamentals of the process, that's problematic. It puts you at risk. And unfortunately and sadly, in the world of finance, when you're dealing with other people's money, no one seems to care. That's a problem. So, one of the things about being a certified financial planner is that I have a fiduciary responsibility. That means I have to do what's in the best interest of the client. It's not the case with some professionals in the real estate business. So that's why you see, especially in commercial real estate, you see a tremendous amount of fraud that has occurred, and the government is been clamping down on it because people are losing hundreds of millions of dollars on a regular basis.
Good to know because there are so many professionals around this area that some people may not even know how many they should hire, or somebody, as you mentioned, that can be qualified in multiple areas. So, what would be at least two or three that you think are fundamental?
Clearly, I'm a big believer, regardless of what state it is, to have legal representation. I believe that you need to have a qualified and seasoned real estate attorney. If you're dealing with a commercial real estate, they have to know commercial. If they're dealing with residential, they have to be a professional at residential. But what you can't have is you can't have your Uncle Harry who's 98 years old and he was a corporate lawyer representing you. It puts you on shaky ground, and I've seen it before. And what happens is it has a compounding effect on the process. And when you have one professional who is, let's just say, weak, it eventually creates delays in the process, and ultimately that costs you, the client, money. And that also is a problem. So the way we look at the world is always solution oriented. Who are the right people? Are they communicating? Are they collaborating? Are we all working in the best interest of the client? And that is our focus. It's always our focus.
So for our global audience, we are going to have a private page here for Tom with all the information, his social media, his contacts. If you need more advice, where to buy his book, that's all over the place. So I highly recommend for those who are considering, this book is one of a series of three upcoming, and they have since the most basic information about buying your first home up to investment homes and etc. And you also have the professional here that you can contact anytime on his page that will reach. From there, you can reach his website and personal contact. So highly recommend you think about it. It's a big decision, so don't make it just out of emotions or out of poor advice. So Tom, continuing our conversation here, do you think what people, we talk about being an emotion, especially for a home that's very emotional. People say, oh, I love this place, I love the view, or I love the neighborhood. What do you think buyers, how do they prioritize wants versus needs?
I think it's everyone wants the perfect home. We all want it naturally. So this goes hand in hand with affordability and your budget. So once you work on your budget, and part of the early part of the book, I talk about planning and being prepared for home ownership, understanding why it's important, but then planning and making sure that you saved enough for a down payment. You know what you can afford. You get pre-approved by a bank so that when the time comes and you're shopping, you walk in with a pre-approval letter in hand, and so that when a seller sees your offer, they know that you're a bona fide buyer, and that's essential. And so,
Interesting. Many people don't even know that exists. So, if in the same question you would like to explain some of these initial steps or preparation, would be very welcome.
Yeah, so typically, I like to start with a client. If they say they're interested in buying a home, I like to start with, okay, so, let's just talk about what you can afford. What kind of job do you have? Are you a 1099? Are you a W-2? How long have you had the job? What does your credit look like? So in the US, we have annualcreditreport.com, and you can pull your credit report. And so I normally ask a client, simply log on and print out a credit report so I can see what your obligations look like. If we need to, we'll pull a credit score as well. And we use the combination of your W-2 income or your credit score, and we just basically back into what your affordability is. And so that's kind of the starting point. And once you know, based on where current interest rates are at, what you can afford, of course, you have to keep in the back of your mind what kind of a down payment you're going to need. If you're aiming for that 20%, well, that's great. But then we have to look at, what do you have on the side? What have you saved? And if you're going to save going forward, how long will it take to save that money? Where is the right place to put it? And of course, and of course, making sure that you're not putting it at risk. So, for instance, hey, I want to buy a home and I have $10,000 to start saving. I'm going to put it in the stock market. Well, the stock market's volatile, or God forbid you actually put it into crypto. You just never know, right? So, we want to be very, very careful, and we work on having a systematic way of savings so that you're meeting your goals and making it realistic. But this also ties into the wants and needs because, depending upon what you can afford and how much of a down payment, some people need to start off small. And when I say small, I mean if the average home in New York is $1 million, it doesn't mean that, and you have a mere $50,000 down, doesn't mean you can't afford a $200,000 co-op or a $350,000 condo as a starting point. Because of the way equity builds in your property, basically through appreciation and through principal pay down, you can grow your equity fairly quickly and then roll that into your next property. Ultimately, in maybe 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe it will take 20 years, but ultimately you can buy that home, that dream home that you want. And it's setting those expectations early on with the client that are key so that the client doesn't lose sight of what's affordable. The last thing we want to do is put them into a financial bind where they pay a little too much more than they can afford and they have trouble making payments. This kind of brings in the issue of having reserves, and we typically want at least 6 months full of reserves sitting on the side so that you know that if you lose your job, if you get sick or something happens to you, you have something to tap into so you're not going to lose your home.
So interesting you talked about it because a lot of people, when they see the dream home, obviously, if it's much ahead of your possibilities, you probably won't even go see it. But if it's that 30% stretch, a lot of people go and think, maybe if I work harder. And sometimes they are lucky or unlucky to have a friend who can help with the down payment. So I heard a few cases of people that bought above their means because they actually could pay the mortgage, but they get a side loan that then they cannot pay in the long run or median. So and hardly people have those 6 months of savings or put aside in case something happens. So it's so good that you're trying to explain to people what a way to buy things that no matter what happens to you, if you have a crisis, if you go through another pandemic, you're going to be able to have at least a minimum period to get settled in the new situation. So,
Yeah.
really, very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And still in the dreamy world, people love to say, oh, but I had to buy it. The house was amazing and I got it for a bargain for what it was. So I love that in your book, there is one part that says, how do I find a bargain? So would you tell us about what you really consider a bargain or if this actually exists in the real estate world?
It's not unusual, actually. It's actually very, very common for properties to be mispriced. Imagine for a minute that it's an estate sale and the family is fighting over the assets, which is very, very common, as you can imagine. And you have the one son that he just wants his money. He doesn't care, and he is, just tormenting everyone in the family. This is very, very common. And what happens is that, if you get, and think about usually $1 million home, for instance, it's not out of the question for that to go for $900,000. It's a 10% discount. How do you beat that? Right? That's pretty good. That's $100,000 in your pocket on day one. There's also, there's a lot of people who get a little older and they just don't understand this. Their mind is still in 1970, and they're like, well, I bought my house for $40,000. I don't know whether it's worth 600,000 or whether it's, worth 400,000. So they just misprice. Again, another reason that I'm a firm believer in using professional real estate brokers, realtors, so that so that you don't get mispriced. That's what their job is. Now, that's a slippery slope because these people all work on commission, so naturally they just want to move this thing along. And they're also in the business. A lot of these people are investors, so they see something that's mispriced. There's a very good chance they're going to step in, or they'll refer it to someone that will step in and buy it at a discount. We've seen situations where, they're flipping contracts, flipping properties. It runs the gamut. There's also expired listings where people list for too high of a price and it sits on the market, or it just could be a seasonal thing where it just didn't sell for whatever reason. They got fed up with the realtor. The listing expired, and time has gone on just a little too far for them, and they want to just get out of it. So it's not unusual. It's actually very, very common to have mispriced real estate. Most of the time, when you see a property on multiple listing service or on one of the realtors' websites, there's a good chance that's getting plenty of market exposure, and it will be priced appropriately. There will be enough buyers and sellers making bids so that you find equilibrium in price. But it's the off-market properties where you most often get the best bargain. And a lot of times it's a matter of in terms of finding them, it's just working with local realtors, letting them know that you're in the market, being prepared once again, having that pre-approval letter that's sitting in your back pocket. You know what you can afford, so that when the time comes, you can move very, very quickly and get that and really get that off the street. Because once it goes on MLS and once it gets this, you can create a bidding war very, very quickly. Particularly if you have realtors who recognize the fact that it's mispriced.
And Tom, you've worked through multiple real estate cycles. What's the biggest misconception you think that people have about the market in 2025?
Yeah, okay, that's a loaded question. The biggest misconception, unfortunately, is that I think the average person in this country thinks that the current administration is doing them some sort of favor, and it's having this volatility in the market is directly related to monetary and fiscal policy and the amount of debt the country is carrying. And a lot of it and by the way, that's not a political statement. It's an economic statement. All you have to do is go to the local grocery store and you realize that everything is costing, 10, 20, 30, 40% more. You can't go to the grocery store without spending $100 these days. And I'm just talking about bread, milk, and some eggs and that type of thing. It just gets very, very expensive. And so, real estate is one of the casualties as well. And when you talk about fiscal and monetary policy, fiscal policy, for instance, we're talking about real estate taxes. We're talking about, the fact is that at the local level, straight up to the U.S. government, we're spending much, much more money than we can afford to spend. So as much as, we're kind of forcing the 10-year treasury down, which is really the benchmark for mortgages, it's not sustainable. Certainly not when in the last 10 months we tacked on an additional $2 trillion in debt in the US. Well, someone has to pay for that. You add to it the fact that with global warming, you have insurance, the cost of insurance is Again, it's gone up 100% in some places. So start adding that back into your analysis for what's affordable, and it's shocking to most people. And I know that the administration seems to think that they drive down, they force the Fed to lower rates, but it's the Fed has little to do with it. It has much more to do with the players in the bond market. They may come down, but they can't possibly stay that way because you can't handle this much trillion dollars, 36 trillion dollars in debt, whatever the number is. And that's really what it boils down to.
And in your opinion, what are the core principles of real estate that never change, no matter the market? Are there any?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, value is a function of supply and demand. That's a core concept. And what I mean by that and how that applies is that regardless of how much you put into your property, if you put gold faucets and you spend an absurd amount of money on landscaping, there has to be a buyer in the market who's willing to buy it. And so we talk about the typical purchaser versus a particular purchaser. And the difference between the two is that, for instance, if I live on a particular street and the house next door becomes available, and I'm like, oh, I would love to have that because I would, I'll pay a premium for that. Now, that's a particular purchaser. That doesn't mean a typical purchaser will pay that same price. Typical purchaser is going to be someone in the market who's been looking and, and essentially understands what the supply and demand dynamics are. And when they recognize that, they're going to give an appropriate price. That doesn't necessarily mean that they won't pay that same price as I would because I live next door to the property, but it may come out when you do an appraisal, when the appraiser can't justify it based on comparable sales in the market. And that's where it can get a little sticky. So you may pay a premium for something because you're a particular buyer and you want that because it's special to you. And but the appraiser can't justify that value. And if they can't justify the value that value, there's a good chance your lender is not going to lend you the full amount that you want.
In your first book, you talk about a lot about buying homes, and especially for first-time buyers. What are the main mistakes that people make? What would you urge them to consider? With all those professionals, these mistakes are a lot happen a lot less, but some people still go look at the house at least on their own and they get enchanted by it. So if I go by myself initially, what should I be looking other than I love this house, I love this neighborhood, the place is amazing, the view is something that I would dream of having. What in your experience, something that would add value for the house in the future, and more importantly, things in the structure that people may not be considering or worrying about in that first minute of excitement?
That's a very good question. So I think everything starts with affordability. So before you ever go look, you really should, unless you're just window shopping, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not really fair to the realtor who's showing it because they need to focus on people who are ready, willing, and able to buy. But there's nothing wrong with window shopping. It's not a bad idea. I mean, with all the technology and so many properties online, your ability to do a virtual walkthrough, you don't really need to go look at a property. So I think it's probably a little bit unfair to a realtor to drag them out to a property when you really can't afford it. Most good realtors will ask you about what's affordable and what's not, what your price range is, and they'll try to get it out of you whether you're legitimate or not, whether you're a bona fide buyer. I think that clearly your location, what's important to you. Is it close to schools? Is it close to work? How is this going to affect my personal life? Am I going to be away from my kids because I have a 2 hour commute every day? I live in this great house, but I have a 2 hour commute. You have to consider those things. The functionality of the house. Sometimes if you're living with an in-law, let's say, you want an extra bedroom, maybe something that's set aside a little bit so that you do have your own family time, but you also have this room for other people. So functionality, how the house flows. This is a big issue when people start to age. And you're like, okay, do we need a colonial where I have to walk up and down the stairs? You get to a certain age and you don't want to walk up and down the stairs anymore. And that's why ranches are so prevalent in Florida, right? One of the reasons. So it's just thinking all these things out, and of course the mechanics. And what I mean by the mechanics, you have to make sure heat, hot water, all that stuff is working, leak-free roof. And again, this is where professionals come in. I'm a big proponent of using the inspection as your maintenance guide. That's your roadmap for things going on in the future. You can make certain sacrifices early on. For instance, you have a small leak, not the end of the earth. If you know how to fix it or you can get it fixed, that's okay. That may be something you can bend on. On the other hand, you have an aging boiler, or you have a hot water heater that doesn't seem to work properly. Unless you get it fixed ahead of time, it's going to be a headache. And I can tell you with that firsthand experience, it's the little things that you sacrifice on and you kind of blow past that will irk you the most when you buy the house, because once you're in there, you're stuck with it. It's your baby. There's nothing you can do about it. And I've lived through this myself. And I'll tell you, I'll tell you the story. The story was we noticed water in the basement, and we put in a French drain to have it to have any water that rose in the basement just automatically pumped out. But the pump was going off all the time. So what I didn't realize is this is a long time ago. What I didn't realize is that the water table was high. So it was a matter of, it was a matter of figuring out, okay, if the water table is high, why is the water sticking around? And I was on a hill, which made it very odd to me. Well, it turns out after 2 years of racking my brains, I realized that my footing drains were clogged, and I dug them all up and I put new ones in. The sump pump never went on again. But that was one of those things where it was something that I was like, yeah, they'll put a French drain in, no problem, won't be an issue. And I blew right past it, and lo and behold, for 2 years straight, it tormented me day and night until I figured out I was literally racking my brains trying to figure out what is causing this water to, pump all the time. And turned out it was a footing drain.
One question about when you actually hire an inspector to make sure you're making a good purchase. Is that common in your experience that they come with a report saying there is a problem in your boiler, whatever, but I love the house, and then the person selling it to me even make an agreement of, okay, you would spend X to fix it, I can have it fixed, or we can get less from your purchase, so you deduct the amount. Anything in this direction normally happens that in the end may not be a good outcome.
You should always do the inspection with the inspector. And they should walk you through and be describing everything they're seeing.
Mm.
And what that does is that kind of sets the stage for what's to come when the report comes back to you. And not going to, and often the realtor, at least a seasoned realtor, will not allow the seller to be there at the same time. And the reason is people get offended because they don't want to hear criticisms of their home. The inspector should be a disinterested um, person involved in this transaction. And being disinterested, they're not an advocate for really anybody. They're just trying to do the right job and make sure that, you're not buying into something that's problematic. And then once you have that report, 9 times out of 10, you use that report as leverage to negotiate from there. And then you have to choose which items, you'll waive, which items you need repaired. And that's really where, a skilled realtor comes in, because they'll help you negotiate these things. This is what they do every day. And good realtors, they'll know exactly what to do. Bad realtors will, basically jam it down your throat and say, well, you're not going to get the house unless if you insist upon having that fixed. I was like, well, it's a leaky roof. That's not acceptable. That's a non-start. So someone has to use that judgment and say, okay, who knows what can happen if, you don't even know if you have a leaky roof where it's coming from. You may not know, right? So a leaky roof can start over here and come down in your living room over here. That's just the way that works. So there are certain things that are really non-negotiable or shouldn't be negotiable. I don't believe in waiving contingencies, an inspection contingency, a mortgage contingency, because again, these are all items that will put you as the buyer at potential risk, and it's completely avoidable. And I think the last thing, you can't be, if the red flags start to fly and you see a lot of resistance and you feel like you're being pressured, it's probably not the right deal. And you can't be afraid to walk away, regardless of whether you love the property or not. And I've had to do it myself, and to the point where you're being browbeat sort of to up your offer, even though you don't feel the house is worth it or you haven't seen any comparable sales that are similar. It's just a matter of, hey, if you want this house, you have to pony up the money and pay for it. But ultimately, you will pay for it.
Yeah, you talk a lot about emotional decisions that lead to bad other decisions, right? And do you have any anecdote, anything in your mind that comes one situation like this that was more emotional than logical and then they terribly regretted?
Well, it's my personal experience was, we found a house that we loved, and we put an offer in. It was an accepted offer. We loved the house, and we went back to our house because we had to prepare to sell that house. And I got a call from the realtor and said, "Hey, we got a better offer. You have 2 hours to 2 hours to up your offer." And I was like, yeah, okay. So meanwhile, I was having an open house in my house at that moment. I actually had people in my house showing my house. And I was like, yeah. And I knew my wife loved the house, but I also knew that neither of us wanted to be bullied into this deal. And mind you, the house was nice. We loved it, but it wasn't really perfect. And then oddly enough, I think 6 months later, we found the perfect house, and everything worked out and it went off without a hitch. So it just goes to show you sometimes things are not meant to be.
Awesome. So you had the
I
intelligent
had to
decision.
disappoint my wife. That's
Yeah, but that was the intelligent decision, and I'm sure she thanked you later, right?
yes.
Yeah. And if somebody is planning to buy a house in the near future, as an expert, how would you advise them to start preparing? Let's say 2026, I want to start doing that, but I had not thought about it until now. So what would be something they could start like right away this January?
Well, clearly the down payment, making sure you clean up any credit issues. So if you have something out there, and so mind you, what happens with credit issues, the lender will run a credit report, and they may see a 30-day late, 60-day late, something that happened, something they don't even know about. So I always start with annualcreditreport.com. You get a free credit report. You can look at it. I'm happy to look at it for my clients, and then I identify something so that when the time comes, we already have an explanation in hand for the lender so that they understand, oh, that's right, I went away to Europe for a month and I made the payment as soon as I got back. And normally that letter will suffice for the lender. The second thing is just making sure you have not only the funds for the down payment, but the closing costs, and of course, have a cushion just in case. You wouldn't want to spend every penny you have. You get into a house, and then next thing you know, there's a problem, and you can't afford to fix it. I'm a big advocate of making sure you have that cushion as well. And then, but you should really enjoy the process. I think it's important. So don't be afraid to spend a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning looking at houses. You get an idea, you get a feel. You can, what's nice about websites like Zillow and Redfin, they have both listings and they have sold properties. So you can go back and forth and look and say, oh, this property sold for this and this looks like this. And you can actually do your own sales comparison approach, right? You can do that. And then, of course, once you start working with a realtor, the realtor is going to give you a market analysis as well, and they'll help you along with those things. So you have a lot of support, and if you have a realtor that you like to work with or someone that's recommended, make sure you vet them and make sure that you're on their list so that when the right deal comes along, you're ready to pull the trigger. Because, like I said, there are bargains out there. Despite what you see in the news, there's always bargains. We see it. I mean, we look at probably, I don't know, $3 billion a year in loans and transactions. So we see a lot. And with that type of volume, it's when you see something that's a steal, you do salivate a little bit. We're
Absolutely. And again, a best way you would recommend to vet a professional. We work with a lot of people here. We have in our audience a lot of people that move here from abroad. So they don't have the advantage of friends or community to recommend something sometimes. Do you think like what, Google reviews? What would be a way to vet somebody if you are in a foreign country or in a new city and you don't absolutely know anybody? What would be a reasonably reliable way?
Great place to start, Google reviews, recommendations from friends and family. But when it comes down to the actual vetting process, you can't be afraid to ask for references. But you need to call the references, not just type an email or a text, but call them and get them on the phone, get them talking. And as soon as they start talking, you'll know. And you can ask simple questions like, how did you feel about the process? How would you rate them from 1 to 10? Did they have to negotiate on your behalf? How did they handle any conflict between any of the other professionals? That type of thing. And by the way, this can take 10 minutes of your time. And if you have 3 references, you can kind of smoke out people who are a little shady very, very quickly. And mind you that we do this for our clients as well, so that if they're lost, we'll make the phone call because some people are just uncomfortable doing that.
Very helpful.
Yeah.
And in your book series, Tom, you break down negotiation and valuation as well, which is of interest for many of our clients, especially the ones that invest in property. What's the number one mistake you see buyers and sellers make in negotiations?
uh, Getting their back up. They get so charged up and they dig in their heels and they just don't want to compromise whatsoever. The analogy I like to use is the type of person that likes to start if you start negotiations and you're $100,000 off. And you say, okay, so listen, let's cut to the chase. Where can we land in the middle? And let's say we're talking about a 400 to a $500,000 property, or we're going to land at 450, and so the seller says, okay, I'll counter offer you. I'm sorry, the buyer says, oh, I'll offer you 400,000. The seller says, I'll counter offer you at 495. And so, right away I roll my eyes and say, okay, this is kind of a non-start. We got to cut to the chase. Is there a middle ground? And get the normally qualified realtors, whether it's the buyer's broker or the seller's broker, they're really good at doing this, where they can communicate and say, okay, listen, our guy's never going to go down to 425, and they're going to be like, well, our guy is not going to go up to 475, and okay, so I'm seeing a 450 right in the middle, right? So You just have to work at it, but you have to do it politely. And where people go wrong is, they get something in their head. And we see this. This is covered in the third book, and it has to do with when things go wrong. People get something in their head and they dig their heels in, they take bad advice, and it gets them into more trouble and more trouble and more trouble. And trouble in the real estate world only costs you money. So avoid it at all costs, really. And I mean it. I've had clients who've lost hundreds of millions of dollars because they stuck with someone who didn't know what they were doing, and they led them down a dead end street, and then it was too late. And what people don't have to understand is that, and I covered this in the book as well, in book one, is that this is about rights. And when you take a mortgage and you take a loan out on a property, you pledge that property, you're giving rights to the lender, and the lender will win. It's no doubt.
No
Now, that doesn't mean they won't bend a little bit. And in the owner occupied home mortgage business, there are protections that give borrowers tremendous leeway and flexibility to correct or right the ship. In commercial, there's no such thing. I mean, you get a little bit because for the most part, the courts are, anti-lender. But that aside, the lender will ultimately win. As long as there's equity in the property, and if the lender is smart enough to get a good qualified attorney, they'll ride this to the end, even if it takes, and I've seen these things last 8, 10 years. That's shocking, I know. But ultimately they get their money.
Oof.
Yeah. And so borrowers need to understand it. And I've been in court with in front of the judge and had to say to the judge, the borrower doesn't have a solution. They want to keep the property, but they have no solution. They don't want to rent it. They want to leave it for their kids. There's plenty of equity in the property. And when you have that mentality that, it's my property, I'm going to keep it forever, but I don't have a solution to fix the problem of bringing it current, that, ultimately you will lose.
Yeah. Sad, right? Well, and finally, if viewers take one mindset shift from your books, what would you say is the best way to start thinking more like a seasoned real estate pro?
Be curious. Be curious about everything you touch. And most business people, successful business people, they have a certain way of thinking of these things. They don't take things on the surface as something that's superficial. They actually give it some thought and they ruminate a little bit. And like you mentioned early on, the very first comment, which about a retail property. Okay, so what do you want to know about it, right? So you have a vacant store, you want to rent it out. How much foot traffic is there? And that's not really a technical issue. You don't have to be, a genius to figure that out. But if you're going to sell things, you need to have foot traffic naturally. If it's on a major roadway, right, you have to have parking, right? These are common sense things, but you have to build on that, and that's why I start off with talking about your rights and which rights you're giving up, and then you eventually you build that into your business model so that you fully understand what you're getting into, and ultimately this is all backed by math, particularly in the commercial real estate world. And by the way, we have not even talked about owner-occupied commercial real estate, which we do a ton of that as well. And that's even a little more complicated because that's a mix of commercial real estate and corporate finance. And you put the two together and you have to figure out their ability to pay rent in a certain amount, but that's all based on their business. And that's even a little more complicated. But so I think that understanding the fundamentals is key, and you have to start somewhere. And so I think that the reason that I wrote this was because it's a great starting point. It's where most people start, which is their home. And from here, we'll continue to build on the ideas and the concepts, and hopefully it will enlighten people, and people will avoid making mistakes.
Tom Ravert, what an educational, helpful interview. It was an enormous pleasure to have you in our show tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.